Now, as you know, I'm from Alberta, and my father was Premier of Alberta for a long time. And when they used to ask him what was Alberta's economic development strategy, he used to say the election of NDP governments in Manitoba, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan. That drove more capital and more capitalists into Alberta than anything the Alberta government could do. But fortunately for the West and fortunately for Saskatchewan and Alberta, that is no longer true. And that is no longer true because of the work of our first guest speaker today, Brad Wall. And as you know, Brad ended the 16 years of NDP rule in Saskatchewan in 2007. He and his colleagues were re-elected in 2011 with 64% of the popular vote, the highest percentage in the province's history. And any of you that have been active in politics, to get 64% of the popular vote is an enormous achievement, and we're very proud of what you achieved, Brad. It's not difficult to see why. 6 consecutive balanced budgets, the largest tax cuts in Saskatchewan's history, and a 44% reduction in the province's debt. And Premier Wall and his colleagues have achieved an enviable record of success in public life. And Brad, we're just absolutely delighted that you've been able to come to our conference this year, and a number of your colleagues from Saskatchewan. And we look forward to hearing what you're going to tell us on Canada, both as an energy and an agricultural superpower. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Premier of Saskatchewan, Mr. Brad Wall.
Morning. Good morning. You should sit down. You haven't heard what I have to say yet. But thank you very much for that warm welcome, Preston. Thanks for the introduction. And Mr. Strahl, and to the board and to the Manning Center, thanks for this conference. Thank you for the chance to participate with you here today. Preston touched on some of the things that have been happening in Saskatchewan. We always make sure that people understand that the government is not taking credit for some of the good news that's occurring in the province in terms of the lowest unemployment rate and some record investment that's happened, and some of the good economic numbers. I think yesterday the weekly earning numbers were out again, and I think we were third in the country in terms of an increase, and we're usually in that range. Credit for all of those things goes to the people of the province of Saskatchewan, goes to our SMEs, our small businesses, the large corporations, world-class champions that we have in Saskatchewan. We also need to recognize good fortune and providential blessings. We have a lot of things going for us, and we try to do that. But we are, as a government, trying to stay out of the way of people that can create economic advantage. We're also trying to set the right tone, the right business climate, the right investment environment in Saskatchewan, and that does include some of the measures around fiscal probity that Preston mentioned. We will, in a couple of weeks, table in the Saskatchewan legislature the 7th consecutive balanced budget, and it's my observation this morning that none of them balanced themselves. They all took some decisions, and some of them are challenging, especially this year with revenue flat, but we know the importance of fiscal responsibility as a cornerstone of our growth agenda. Speaking about Saskatchewan outside the province is one of the best parts of my job. That's why I often say I think I have the best job in Canada. Some of my staff, because they're unhelpful, wanted to test that thesis, and they actually determined that I don't even have the best job amongst people named Brad Wall. There's a Brad Wall that's a pro bass fisherman in the United States, doing pretty well. There's a Brad Wall who's a pretty good mixed martial artist. There is a Brad Wall who is on the Australian PGA. He's a professional golfer. And maybe most troubling of all, we found in the Wall Street Journal reference to a Brad Wall, and I'm not making this up, who is the Senior Vice President of Krispy Kreme Donuts. He is responsible for the supply chaining for the donut company, and so this takes him all over the United States, where he must ensure the logistics of donut sales and apparently test the donuts and for this he makes $1 million a year. So I now know how 30% of the people of Saskatchewan feel, because I hate Brad Wall too. I should also bring you greetings this morning on behalf of Rider Nation. I'm not sure if you've heard, but we won the Grey Cup this year. And the Rider Nation is a goal-oriented nation. And we've set a goal to be insufferable for the rest of this season, and I think we may be. Yes, thank you. Deb says we're doing well, especially in places like Winnipeg and Calgary and Winnipeg, if I haven't mentioned them. Some people have pointed out to us, by the way, that, you know, before you get all about the Riders, you've only won 4 championships in the 101-year history of the CFL. This is true, but we always point out that since 2007, since the government changed, we've been in 4 and we've won 2. And some have pointed out to me, by the way, that the Saskatchewan Roughriders have never won a Grey Cup during the 47-year rule of the CCF NDP. Some have asked me if I'm going to use that in the next election campaign. Yes, actually, we are going to use it. So, ladies and gentlemen, the context for my remarks this morning is the simple premise that today we live in a world where the fastest growing economies in that world prize food security and energy security. Their middle classes are growing rapidly. They are demanding ever more protein-intense diets, new technologies, modern comforts, better transportation. So in that world, and forgive me the use of this too oft applied rhetorical device, but in that world I want to tell you about a place. This place is the 6th largest producer of crude oil on the planet. It has the 3rd largest proven oil reserves on Earth. It produces in any given year 15 to 20% of the world's supply of uranium, and the richest grade of uranium you'll find anywhere in the world. It is a home to energy innovation, proving to the world even that clean coal is not an oxymoron, focused on technologies for sustainable energy development. This place also, by the way, in this context this morning, has land, and a lot of land. The 3rd largest number of arable acres per capita on the planet. This place is the 3rd largest wheat exporter in the world. It produces 51% of the world's lentils. Think about that in those fast-growing economies that want protein replacement. Half of the lentils on Earth come from this place. 48% of the world's pea exports. 43% of the world's mustard exports. 15% of that comes back and ends up, I think, on my ties. 42% of the world's canola seed exports. 41% of the world's canola oil exports. This place produces 30% of the world's flax seed exports, and it is home to 45% of the known reserves of that very strategic fertilizer, especially in those growing economies, known as potash. 45% of the world's reserves. It's home to, yeah, we should clap for that. It's home to leading agricultural technologies, biosciences, life sciences, yes, GMO technologies that are helping to feed a hungry world. Remembering again the context this morning, the fast-growing economies of the world want food security and energy security. This place must be well positioned, wouldn't you think? This place must have a very bright future ahead of it, given that context. Never mind whatever other resources it might have, just in terms of these 2 areas, its future is bright. But I think there's something a little troubling about that place this morning as well. Some of her leadership, some of her quote-unquote elite, are not very comfortable with some of these facts, it would seem. Maybe unaware, but I think mostly uncomfortable, some even ashamed of some of those things this place has to offer. Of course, I'm talking about the country that you love, the country that I love, that beautiful and bountiful, expansive, odds-defying, promise-filled Dominion of Canada. And Canada is at a most propitious point in its history because we are an energy power with opportunity to increase that standing, and we are a food power with opportunity to increase that standing into superpower status. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a good thing for our country, for yours. We ought to be proud of it. We ought to never be ashamed that we have these things that the world wants. And by the way, if one region of the country might have the elements of this truth, whatever those were, in some greater proportion than other regions of the country, let us all rally around them and help them develop those, help them explore new markets, ensure that we have opportunity for today and legacy for tomorrow, because what is good for one region of this country is good for all of Canada. In Saskatchewan, we do not yet have any commercial oil sands development. We have the geology. Our energy minister is here. He's been working with Cenovus. They have a play up there. They're looking at it, but we do not yet have a commercial play for oil sands in northern Saskatchewan. But we are glad that Alberta does. We are proud that Alberta has this resource. We are proud that Alberta companies, together with the government, are working to ensure that it is sustainably developed. It puts us on the world energy map in a big way. It's why we have the third most proven reserves on Earth. We should all be proud of that. In Saskatchewan, we're the second largest producer of oil in Canada, and we have a large share of the Bakken Formation. The Bakken Formation, according to the U.S. Geological Survey, is the largest conventional play in North America, bigger than Prudhoe Bay. One that we share grudgingly with Montana and North Dakota. We're trying to take care of that through horizontal drilling, but I hope you're proud of that. I hope the rest of the country sees this as an asset for all of Canada. We have the richest uranium on Earth, and that's 17 to 20% of it. We think this is a good thing. It ought to be a source of pride as we sustainably develop it. And 45% of all the world's potash in this completely contrived place that's hard to spell and easy to draw, the province of Saskatchewan, in a world that wants that strategic fertilizer. We hope the country would be proud of that. Today, China is growing at a sluggish 7.5%. The ASEAN, 5.1%. Indonesia is about 6.2% at 230 million people. India, 5.4%. They need, and they will need for some time, the building blocks of a growing economy: energy. Consider then the opportunity for us in this country. Consider the opportunity right at our Pacific doorstep. We are an energy power. We ought to be aspirants to be an energy superpower, and then we ought to talk like it, and we ought to act like it. According to the United Nations, the world will have to grow 70%, think about this now, 70% more food by 2050 just to keep up with population growth. Consider then the opportunity right at our Pacific doorstep, right at our Atlantic doorstep. We are a food power. We ought to be aspirants to being a food superpower. Then we should act like it. We should claim it. We should boldly stake a claim to these things and work that claim as though we were amidst a rush of Yukon proportions. And we need to refute, or maybe at best politely ignore, those who opine against boldness in our country. Those who say it is un-Canadian to make such claims, let alone to act on them. I think they have forgotten that our country was built against every continental tendency, built across unimaginable distance and terrain, bridging deep and dangerous chasms in language and religion and culture, built effectively by a railroad, a state crafter from Kingston, a couple of cases of Madeira, and epic boldness, audacity. A few years ago, our country was getting ready to host the Vancouver Olympics. The Canadian Olympic Committee introduced a new program, and it was considered a departure. I don't know if you remember the debate that ensued. It was called On the Podium. They had a detailed plan about improving Canada's Olympic performance, They were going to identify those things we could excel at. They were going to resource them and support our athletes. And it was going to start with an attitude, or maybe more accurately, an attitude change. It was about believing that our country and her athletes could be the best in the world. I've never understood why, but this made a lot of people very uncomfortable. You'll recall that when Own the Podium was first announced, there was some hand-wringing and some tut-tutting, and people did say that it seemed to be a little un-Canadian. Here's an example.
For instance, during the Canadian Olympics, the Canadians were saying, "Own the podium," and I put out something that said, "Oh, it's a bit brash to say, it's a bit un-Canadian, it's a bit too brash to say, own the podium."
I don't want to pick on Margaret Atwood. She was not the only person saying these things. There were others. But I wanted to show you that clip for two reasons. First, I know Margaret Atwood will be excited that she spoke to the Manning Conference this year. But second, maybe we should consider that what she had to say. Maybe she's right. See what you think. Looks pretty Canadian to me. In our province, we had to overcome some attitudinal challenges not very long ago. When we were in opposition, our then leader, Elwyn Hermanson, put forward an economic plan for the province informed by a population goal, actually. We thought that would be a good measure. As a province that too often bought luggage for students when they graduate because they were going somewhere else, population was an important metric for our economic progress. And so we set this objective of the province growing by 100,000 people in 10 years. And at the time, many in academia weighed in and said unequivocally that this was not achievable, that the government ought never to base its policies of the day on growth because it wasn't possible. Remember the resources that we're talking about, the people that we're talking about. And government of the day was listening to those who said those things, because I was in the legislature when a finance minister for the NDP government, who I'm not going to name him, but his initials are Harry Van Mulligan, said that this was farcical. Actually, that was a quote. That it was completely unrealistic for the province to grow in this way. Think about this. We were advocating that the province's population grow by the national average. 1% a year. We weren't talking about finding Bigfoot. And the view was that this was not achievable. Well, those people were right. The province didn't grow by 100,000 people in 10 years. It did it in 6. Yeah. The point is that attitudinal shifts are important. The point I'm trying to make this morning, Own the Podium is working. It doesn't guarantee victory. It doesn't guarantee success, but it gives us the best chance at success. And that does sound pretty Canadian to me. Canada can own the podium in Olympic sports. We can do it economically. We can identify our strengths. We can focus on them. We can stop being afraid of talking about what those strengths might be and defending our economic interests. We can own the energy podium and the food podium, but it's not just enough to say it. We're going to need a plan. And some of the things that our current federal government has done, a lot of the things are taking us down the road to that plan already. First and foremost, we need to maintain the fundamentals in this country, fiscal responsibility. We need to make sure our taxes are competitive. If we're going to own those podiums, we need to make sure our regulatory environment is competitive if we're going to own those podiums, and we need to make sure we are balancing the budget Thomas Jefferson said, "We must make our election between economy and liberty or profusion and servitude." You got to lay the case out pretty good. We ought to choose economy and liberty. The point is, without fiscal discipline and a sensible competitive tax system, we will not make progress. It'll be difficult to own those podiums. Second, we need to invest in innovation, especially in these areas. There needs to be public investment where it's not a commercial proposition just yet, and more private investment where it can be. In Saskatchewan, we are showing that clean coal is not an oxymoron. We're going to go live on the world's largest clean coal project in southeast Saskatchewan. We're taking CO2 off a coal-fired plant. We're selling it to the oil companies who are using it as a solvent and reanimating previously thought to be old well sites, increasing production, and then we're going to store it as we have been storing it in Saskatchewan for about 20 years. We'll store it geologically. We're investing in the private sector significantly in agriculture and bioscience, in nuclear science in our province. As a country, we need to focus on where we can win in food and energy and also invest in innovation. Third, and this is important, I'm going to spend just a bit of time on this if you'll permit me, we need to make sure we are getting what we have to market. If the world wants what we have, it's got to get to those places. And what's happening today in the world and in our country should alarm us all. There are 50 ships today waiting off the port of Vancouver and at Prince Rupert, empty and waiting for Saskatchewan and Canadian grain. Our logistics system simply can't get it to them right now. Japan has switched their wheat buying from our country to the United States. We haven't made any sales to Algeria yet. That's a solid customer, not because we don't have the wheat, but we can't get it there. So the grain handlers, the marketers aren't making those calls because they know they can't deliver. If we're going to be a food power, if we're going to be an energy power, an export power, we've got to make sure that we have the logistics in this country. And we need to support the federal government, and Minister Ritz has been doing a good job on this file. We need to support them to take whatever steps they need to take to ensure that this issue is dealt with today and for the long term. And for those who aren't that familiar with agriculture, maybe they live far away from it, this underscores both Canada's ability to produce world-class crops in terms of volume and quality and how it impacts people. The officials tell us that we're 15 to 20 days away of General Mills running out of oats for Cheerios. 15 to 20 days away because they can't get it. We're a principal supplier of that crop. And I don't know about you, but I like Cheerios. And all the other things that come from that particular crop. And it underscores how important your country is, doesn't it, in that value chain, if that's what those U.S. food processors are saying. 15 days worth of supply, and then it's done. This is an important issue. The fourth element, we think is international engagement. CETA is a good deal. Credit the federal government for herding all the provincial cats and all the sectors and all the industry to conclude an historic trade deal with the European Union. It's going to be great for agriculture. At our request, the federal government also has removed restrictions on uranium investment in our province from companies in Europe. We think that might mean about $2.5 billion in added investment in greenfield projects in Saskatchewan. It's a good deal, but folks, if you like free trade with Europe, you're going to love freer trade with Asia. And so we need as a country to pivot to Asia, to conclude the next trade deal there, and it looks like it's South Korea. And we need to make sure, ladies and gentlemen, that there isn't one particular sector of the economy in our country that holds up an important first Asian trade deal in South Korea. And when that deal is over, let's get on to the next one. And let's encourage the federal government to pursue their multilateral intentions at TPP and with the ASEAN region. In 5 years, the combined Asian economies will be a third larger than the EU economy. Between 2010 and 2025, Asian populations are expected to grow by 550 million people, while Europe is going to decline. You know, we always quote Wayne Gretzky. Remember when he said, well, I was pretty good at hockey because I anticipated where the puck was going to be rather than where it was? We quote him, and then we really don't do anything about it. The puck's been in Asia for a long time. It's going to be there, and so the steps the federal government has currently taken need to be encouraged and accelerated so we can conclude those agreements. Engagement, by the way, also means that we as Canadians need to be ready to engage in the debate. Sometimes they're controversial, that comes from increased trade in energy and food, whether it's about bitumen or whether it's about GMOs. As Canadians, we understand what John Adams said when he mentioned that facts are stubborn things. We need to start, though, defending the facts and articulating those facts in these debates that are occurring now here in our country and in our customer countries. Facts like, in the context of Keystone, facts like that there are today 80 pipelines carrying hydrocarbons between Canada and the United States, and they've been doing it for years, right under Daryl Hannah's nose. It means pointing out to Martin Sheen and Neil Young and Robert Redford and other technical advisors to the administration that there is not another country on the planet that is an energy-producing country that is investing more per capita or by any other measure from a public sector and a private sector in improving the sustainability of energy development. There simply isn't. You won't find one. There's not one investing more on in terms of habitat, reclamation, and innovation in energy, and we should tell somebody that as they're making these decisions. It means pointing out, by the way, also that our energy competitors, because if you're not buying from us, you're buying from someone else, in many cases do fail in unspeakable ways the cause of humanity, the cause of human rights and liberty, and that they have little to no public or private interest, frankly, in the environmental issues around energy development. We need to use the facts. Where we can, we should use a bit of humor. About a year ago, I was in Washington lobbying on the Keystone, and Martin Sheen, for whatever reason, was in Saskatchewan at a conference, and the media scrummed him and asked him, what do you think of the fact that the Premier is in Washington lobbying for Keystone? Do you have a message for him? And he said, yes, I do. And here's what he said to me through the media. He was talking to me. He said, don't do this, lobby for Keystone. It's not going to be something you're going to be proud of in the future. And I heard that and I thought, I hope you said that to Charlie, actually, at some point. That probably would have been We need to engage. And when we do so, we need to be united. And so it is not helpful. I understand there's going to be a debate around energy in its different forms in our country. It's a free country, it's a democracy. But when we go abroad, whether we're in opposition or whether we're in government, when we go abroad and visit a capital that might be making a decision that would have a huge economic impact on thousands of families that work in the oil sands or the energy sector in our country, maybe we should be a bit circumspect. Maybe we should consider the interests of our country. And when I see opposition politicians going down to Washington to lobby against the interests of the economy of Western Canada, that is hard to understand. And we need to encourage those folks to stop doing that. Have the debate, have the discussion. But let's be united as we engage. And maybe we ought not to call important parts of the economy that are creating wealth for all of Canada a disease, the Dutch disease. Maybe we ought not to do that either. We also need to be as a country, we need to be as consistent as possible when we engage. I am grateful that the leader of the third party supports Keystone. We should all be, because this is this unity we're talking about in consensus. We should support this fact. But I do not know how you can support Keystone and be against Gateway. I don't understand how you can make that argument, especially to our American friends. How do you advocate for Keystone XL, which is a pipeline carrying bitumen across the United States to the ocean, but be against Gateway, which was a pipeline carrying bitumen across our country to the ocean? And I've had this put to me by the chairman of the Senate Energy Committee when I was there last March. He said, oh, you want us to approve Keystone? You can't even get Gateway approved. And I didn't have a real good answer for that. I don't think the story about the sun and the wind is going to cut that. I think we need to be consistent when it comes to these issues of energy transportation. Ladies and gentlemen, I just believe that we should be very hopeful about the future of this country if we get some of these things right. I believe we can be an energy superpower. I believe we can be a food superpower. And there's many other things we will offer the world, but I want to focus on these things today. We need to claim that, though, first as a goal, and then act on it. And in order to act on it, we're going to need political license from our fellow citizens. We're going to need their support. We're going to need to ensure that they agree with this plan, that they like the action points to get us to where we need to be. And I want to close with this. We as free enterprisers aren't very good at explaining the why, frankly. As I say, we're not very good at finishing the sentence. The sentence that starts with, I believe in these free enterprise principles because it will grow the economy, because, and sometimes we talk about the GDP and maybe we get to jobs and that's not even quite good enough, but I don't believe we're able to answer, to finish that sentence, to explain the why to people, why we would want them to come along on this journey and implement these policies and aspire to these goals. We're working hard in Saskatchewan to be able to finish the sentence. In Saskatchewan, there's a fellow named Gordon Iashapi. He's a real person. Gord is a graduate of the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technologies. Since 2007, our government has increased funding to that school by 47% because they get results. They connect graduates with jobs. Gord is from the Carry the Kettle First Nation. He became a journeyman electrician 2 years ago. He passed his Red Seal test with a mark of 85%. And his motivation is your motivation. He's got dreams for himself and for his family. And he also has another goal. He wants to inspire other young people. He says, and I quote, when I go home back to Carry the Kettle, all the kids run up to me and ask me how I became an electrician. I tell them how and that they can do it too, end quote. We were able to increase funding to SIIT because of a growing economy. Gordon was able to engage in the economy and be an example to those young First Nations kids because of that growing economy. He's the end of the sentence. We need to talk about him. In Saskatoon, there lives a woman by the name of Gail Dixon. Gail lives in a very small house with her guide dog, Daisy. She has some severe and multiple disabilities and simply cannot work, not won't work, cannot work. For years, she's gotten by on social assistance welfare. And a few years ago, advocates for that group in our province, that wonderful group in our province, came to us and said, we'd like you to just change the name. Don't even put any more funding in, but we'd like it to be income support and not welfare, because this is different for us. And we made that change. We introduced something called Saskatchewan Assured Income for the Disabled. It's known as SED. And then we were able to increase a little bit anyway some of the support here. And the SED program now provides Gail with a couple of $100 extra a month. And she said, quote, I had a big stupid grin on my face when I received that first check. When she was on social assistance, you see, a family member told Gail that she was embarrassed of her for receiving welfare. And Gail said to us, she doesn't feel ashamed anymore. She said, quote, it's like I earn my money now because of my disability. I didn't do anything wrong. I shouldn't feel ashamed. SED gives me respect and I can take care of myself. The reason we were able to provide those few extra $100 every month to Gail is why it's because of a growing economy. It's because we are able to successfully export food and energy. And Gail Dixon is the end of the sentence. They're the end of the sentence, Gord and Gail, and they're the reasons that we should be bold. So, in a world where the fastest growing economies prize food security and energy security, given that we have a lot to offer that world, given that we know then what the end of the sentence is it un-Canadian to boldly claim that this country ought to be a food superpower, an energy superpower, and then enact a plan to achieve those things? I think Gord and Gail might say, sounds pretty Canadian to me. May God bless the Dominion of Canada. Thank you very much.